Welcome to our webinar. Thank you for joining us today. We're going to get started with some questions for you. Some of you may have already started this. We have a historic photo that we would like you to take a look at. And in the chat box, if you could introduce yourself by giving your name, your grade level, your school district, and 2 questions or observations that you have about this photo. So let's take a minute. If you haven't already done that, if you could enter in your information. This is a great photo that we found in our archives, so we're really excited to have you explore this a little bit more today. While you're entering some of that information into the chat box, let me tell you a little bit about the chat. We are going to use the chat a lot today. This is not a sit and get webinar. We want all of you to be actively engaged, writing questions, sharing ideas that come to mind. And so whenever you see this chat icon that pops up on the screen, we want you to take that clue that this is your opportunity to enter your thoughts into the chat box. We are going to be using the chat box throughout the presentation, so you'll see this multiple times. And just so you know, we'll be addressing questions that come through on the chat box as we're able to, but we also have some time left at the very end of the presentation for Q&A. So does it look like most folks have had a chance to introduce themselves? Great. Okay, well, we are going to come back to that photograph again a little bit later in the webinar.
And hello, I'm Jess Winkelaar, and I will be co-presenting with Kate. She's going to get us started, and then I'll come back. I'm currently the program coordinator for the Center for Social Studies Education, and I'm also I work at the Department of Education to support social studies education.
Great, thanks, Jess. And I'm Kate Stour. I also work in education outreach at the Minnesota Historical Society, and I help support the Center for Social Studies Education. We're going to start by telling you a little bit about the Minnesota Center for Social Studies Education. As you can see, this is a partnership between both the Minnesota Department of Education and the Minnesota Historical Society. This began in 2009. And the CSSC exists primarily for 3 key reasons. We want to help support teachers as they implement the new social studies standards and school districts. We want to provide resources for the social studies classroom, and we want to connect and strengthen the social studies community. We do have a website that's located at csse.mnhs.org. And it's a great website. It was designed as a one-stop shop for all things related to social studies education in Minnesota. And you can see at the bottom of the website, if you visit the CSSC website, you'll see down at the bottom that we have a list of all of our partner organizations. And all of these organizations have a wealth of resources, lesson plans, trainings, all kinds of things, especially for elementary teachers. And so some wonderful resources for you to check out there related to social studies in elementary school. Let's start by talking about what is social studies. According to the National Council for the Social Studies is the integrated study of the social studies and humanities to promote civic competence. Ultimately, social studies is all about people. It's all of those different factors that impact the way that we behave as people. The political forces, the economic forces, social, and historical, geographical, all of those things that really impact who we are as human beings. So why should students learn social studies in the elementary grades? First of all, we're preparing all students for citizenship. Secondly, this is a way to engage all students. In fact, just a couple of years ago, the Guardian of Democracy report came out in which they cited research that shows that students are less likely to drop out of high school if they've had high quality civic education. So truly, this is a way, social studies provides an opportunity for all students to engage in the conversation, to feel like they have a voice. So it's very important that we're doing social studies and giving students a chance to succeed not only in those social studies realms, but also throughout their academic career. This is the one place where students can all feel like they have a voice. And finally, social studies is required by state law. There are several state statutes that do require that we do social studies throughout students' academic career, from kindergarten on up through high school. Let's take a minute and talk about anchor standards. In our Minnesota social studies standards that were revised in 2011 and 2012, we have what are called anchor standards. So if we think about what are kind of the big ideas that we want students really to master in their social studies lessons, one big idea might be, how do I act as a member of a community? Okay, this is related to civic skills. And so we do, in fact, have an anchor standard, Civic Standard 1, which is related to this question. How do we develop those civic skills to be part of a community? And so in our standards, we have these anchor standards, which means that it's a standard that captures the big idea in civics. So this is something that's really important that we want kids to come back to again and again and again throughout their social studies career, so that by the time they graduate from high school, they've really mastered that standard. It's so important that we're going to have students practice it again and again until they've completely mastered it. And so here you can see Civic Standard 1. This anchor standard, in fact, students are practicing in kindergarten, first grade, second grade, third grade, fourth grade, fifth grade, and sixth grade. So whatever grade level you teach, I guarantee there will be benchmarks at your grade level that are related to the Civic Standard 1. And the same is true of all of the standards throughout the standards document. They all follow this anchor standard structure. So you have one standard that captures one of the big ideas, and then at the individual grade level, you have specific benchmarks that relate to one of these big anchor standards. So what is in the standards? Basically, if you look at any of the standards, you could break it down into three things. We've got content, we've got concepts, and we have skills. And we tend to spend a lot of time as teachers sort of in this area between content and concepts. We're pretty comfortable teaching about content and specific dates, facts, people, things like that. We're comfortable with that. But really, we'd like to be spending a lot more time on the skills and on the concepts. So the concepts are those big ideas that are captured in the anchor standards, and some of the things that that we'll be talking about today, and how can we be using those skills to really get at some of those big concepts in the anchor standards. Here's a Wordle that we put together this is a conglomeration of all of the anchor standards and benchmarks from elementary. So we sort of smashed them all together and came up with this Wordle. And you can see some of the big concepts that are represented in elementary school. We've got government, rights, democracy, some of those big civics concepts. We also see some geography concepts like settlement, space, place. What are those things? We also see some things that pop up in the history standards, like culture, time, students mastering that concept of time. And then we also see, of course, some economic concepts too. So what is choice? And what is scarcity? So obviously there are concepts that are so integral to all of these anchor standards. And so hopefully some of the activities that we're doing today will help you really think about how we get at some of those higher level concepts. We also put together a Wordle that captures some of the skills that students are going to be doing. And obviously in this webinar today, we are only going to be talking about 4 skills. 60 minutes is a limited amount of time, so we're going to get through 4 big skills that students will have to practice a lot in these elementary standards. But obviously you can see from this Wordle there are a lot of other skills that we won't be talking about in today's webinar. So we encourage you to visit the standards document itself for a more comprehensive look at all of the skills that students will have to do in the elementary standards. So how do we do social studies? Really, in social studies, we start by asking questions. And we're talking about, this isn't just the questions that you can find the answers to in books. Okay, we want you to think about those questions that students really have to ponder and grapple with. And sometimes these are questions that don't even have good answers. And, you know, we're okay with ambiguity in social studies. We like to ask those kinds of questions that are the really hard questions because it gets kids to think. And, you know, ultimately, any of us who work in the field of social studies, we know that social studies is really about critical thinking and problem solving. So how do we get kids to develop those critical thinking skills that will help them be the problem solvers for the future? We are going to have you do a poll at this point. We want to get a sense of, if we think about asking questions and how important that is, a lot of what we walk you through today is going to focus on inquiry. And so if we think about inquiry, what are you doing in your classroom related to inquiry? So take a minute and answer this poll. In the chat box, Heidi is giving you the link to the poll, so you can just click on that link, and that'll take you right to the poll. So do you do inquiry in your classroom? Yes, I use it almost every day. Yes, I use it often. Yes, I use it sometimes. No, I don't do inquiry very much. Or no, I don't know what inquiry is. And any of those answers are fine. We just want to get a sense of where you're at. Great. Thank you for your responses. It looks like we have folks kind of in the middle. Some of you are familiar with inquiry. You use it sometimes. A couple of you, one of you uses it often, and one of you uses it almost every day. So that's great. I look forward to all of your feedback as we're walking you through some of these inquiry lessons today. Hopefully you will have a lot of ideas that you can share with the rest of the group as well. So let's talk for a minute about inquiry and social studies specifically. Inquiry is a really big part of these new social studies standards. And so of the activities that you'll walk through today, you'll see that they are all tied to that inquiry process. We do have, if you go to the standards document itself, there's a graphic that's right on the front page. And if you follow that ring that's right in the center of the graphic, you'll see there are 4 key skills that are listed there. And inquiry is one of those big skills that we want students to master in the social studies standards. We want to use this inquiry process to position students as historians, as economists, as political scientists, and as geographers. So we want them to practice these skills that folks are actually using in these fields. So students ask questions, they think, they problem solve, and finally they communicate their findings with the outside world. And that last step, communication, is really important. And so one of our activities today is going to focus on that. On the CSSE website, we have a series of graphics. And so we want you to visit the CSSE website. If you want to take a minute right now and go to the CSSE website, remember it's cssc.mnhs.org. And you can follow the pathway. Start by clicking on Classroom Tools, then Instruction, and then Inquiry. And this will take you to a whole series of graphics that have been developed, similar to the one you see on screen. The one that's on the screen right now is a general inquiry graphic for grades K through 2 that asks some really great key questions in each of those 4 disciplines. But there are also a series of graphics for grades 3 through 8. And they're in both black and white and color. And you know, these might be a great thing that you want to print up and create some posters for your walls, or use it as a guide for students to walk them through the inquiry process. So if inquiry is all about asking questions, then what are the really big, important questions that we want students to get at in social studies? The first that we're going to consider today is, how do I learn about the past? In civics, how do I act as a member of a community? In economics, how do I make a good choice? And how do I know where things are located in geography? When do students practice inquiry? You'll see they practice at kindergarten, at first grade, at second grade, third grade, fourth grade, fifth grade, and sixth grade. So we have students practicing these really important inquiry skills at all grade levels, from kindergarten through sixth grade. So no matter what you teach, hopefully the activities that we provide for you today will be something that you can use in your classroom. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jeff.
All right, thanks, Kate. All right, Kate did an excellent job of just talking a little bit more about what social studies is and what inquiry might look like in social studies, and also why it's so important to get our young learners thinking about social studies in school in explicit ways. We know there are always thinking about it and doing it because they're humans, and that's really what social studies is all about, and kids love to solve problems. And that's really what we're trying to do in social studies education, is just give students the skills and the tools to do these processes to really do social studies and make an impact on their own lives. And so I'm going to walk you through today 4 discipline-specific skills. And each of them is going to focus on a certain grade level, but they all affect the K-6 learner. So even if a certain skill is not at your exact grade level, it's also really good to know as an elementary teacher just how you can support that if you happen to be below it, or how you can build off that skill if you teach a grade above the grade level that we're doing. So we'll do them in this order. We're going to start with history, then we'll move on to an economics skill, then geography, and then we'll wrap up with civics. So historical inquiry, as Kate mentioned, is an anchor standard. And so kids are practicing historical inquiry really from all the grades in elementary school and even up through 12th grade. And sometimes this one culminates in a project at the middle or high school called History Day, which is a great way to enact this process. And so the key question here is, how do I learn about the past? We're going to focus for grade 3. So grade 3 teachers, get those pencils ready. But again, this will really help either primary or upper elementary teachers as well. So in 3rd grade, this is the benchmark for historical inquiry. So the verb is examine. So we want kids to examine records, maps, and artifacts. And the other thing we want students to do is answer basic questions. So we're really getting 3rd graders to examine and answer. And the questions are about times and events in history, both ancient and more recent. And 3rd grade teachers, you know that ancient history piece is very important. So if the blue things are highlighting the verbs, the actual skills of what we want students to do, what might be some concepts in this benchmark? So take a minute and just see if you, a word or two that you might consider a concept. Okay, and here are a couple. Historical records, maps, and artifacts are primary sources, and that's a huge concept, the concept of a source. And it's really important kids are introduced to that even in kindergarten, but it's really a chance for kids to examine these sources in 3rd grade. And then another big concept relates to time, and that's ancient. So just taking a minute and being sure that you define these concepts with students at the beginning, and then use those words and those terms throughout the activity. So that ancient, the concept of ancient from long ago, is so important, especially at that 3rd grade level. So what we are going to do is we are going to be doing one part of the historical inquiry process. This particular visual is designed for grades 3 through 5 learners. And by grade 5, the students will be doing the entire process. But we are going to do one piece today. So we are really going to focus on, what do my sources tell me? And this is primary source analysis. At the beginning of the webinar today, you looked at a source. You looked at a primary source. That is, you looked at a photograph. A photograph is one source from the time of the event. You can use this tool or one like it with your students. And so when we asked you to enter in a comment or an observation, that would be the one of the columns on the chart. And then we also asked you at the beginning to add for a question using this tool. Here it is again, observe, reflect, and question. Do we have any questions or ideas from the beginning that were chatted in? Heidi, maybe we could just have one example of something that was brought up by a teacher.
A few concerns, not concerns, but questions were brought up about the safety. So one interesting question was, what would the insurance premium be on a playground like this today?
That's great. You could really, yeah, inquiry, of course, can take you in many directions. So I just wanted to give you the information about this source, as you can see over here on the side. Sorry. It was actually a playground at Landon Park Beach in Grand Rapids, Minnesota, and it took place in 1955. So if you look closely at the photo, you can see that the students, or the children, sorry, were actually in their bathing suits. So that was an indicator of the site or the setting near a beach. And then, right, great observation at maybe some of the differences in playgrounds between the past and today. So you can use the tool, like the one from the Library of Congress, to really get kids to examine and guide that examining process. But the other half of the third grade benchmark is to get kids to answer questions. So one strategy is to use a different primary source, which is an artifact. And one thing that is a great way to really tap into that curiosity of kids is just put something in a box or a paper bag and really get kids to maybe make some predictions, give them a few clues ahead of time. But then that third grade benchmark really wants you to get kids to answer questions. So imagine that I just pulled this particular artifact out of my box, and I really wish I could, but we're going to do the next best thing and just show you an image of it. This particular artifact, I'm going to ask you a few questions, and I just want you to chat one answer. So I'm going to ask you a series of 4 questions, and if you can just chat an answer to one of them into the chat box. The questions that I'm asking are coming right out of the benchmark language in the example section. I modified them a little bit, but really it's basically the 5 W's. So we want to get our kids looking at primary sources and answering those basic historical questions. So the first one is who? And who might have made this? I'm going to step off just to let you focus on it. Another basic question, what? What might this represent? When might this primary source have been made? And why? Why might this particular artifact have been made? So go ahead and just chat your thoughts to one of those questions in the chat box. So what are some of the answers that were entered in the chat box, Heidi?
It looks like it was made by a folk artist, something for amusement, like a toy of some sort, child's toy. It was made long ago. Someone who is no longer living made this object. What is it made out of?
Thanks, Heidi. Those are all great answers. Here's the actual information about this ancient artifact. It's called Woman Sitting on a Swing. It's currently on exhibit at the Archaeological Museum in Heraklion, which is on the island of Crete. This particular artifact was discovered at the Hagia Triada archaeological site, and it dates back to 1450 to 1300 BC. So that is an ancient artifact. So as you're thinking about having students examine texts, and this goes for any grade level benchmark, we can see that there are a variety of texts. And in the English Language Arts document, there's a list. And this list includes the primary sources we were talking about, but also it includes some secondary sources, which are also important. So please check that ELA document for some ideas for primary sources. So to review, what is historical inquiry? The whole process is asking the question, analyzing the primary source, drawing a conclusion, and sharing findings. And we really focused on analyzing primary sources today by observing photographs and also examining artifacts. So in the chat box, take a minute and describe 2 primary sources that you could have students examine to learn about a history topic at your grade level. So take 1 minute and share something in the chat, please. All right, Heidi, what are a couple of examples of primary sources?
Memoirs of Paul Revere, things from a local antique store, census records, clerk's ledger, from the fur trade, Constitution, and some other great things.
Excellent. Well, thank you. Those are all wonderful ideas. And the takeaway from this section is really to have your students use primary sources in the classroom. We are going to move on to our second disciplinary skill, and that is economic reasoning. Again, this is a skill that students practice at every grade level from K through 6. How do I make a good choice? We're going to focus on grade 4, and this is the benchmark at that grade level. Apply a reasoned decision-making process to make a choice. So again, the verb here is apply. We want our 4th grade students to actually apply a process to make a choice. That part is up to you, is what might the choice be. Again, when you look at this, when students do this skill, we really want them to emphasize the concept. And then this one, of course, the overarching concept in all of economics is choice. Before we do the specific activity and practice the skill for this benchmark, there's a couple other concepts to review. The first one is cost. In economics, cost is what you're going to give up. Cost really has nothing to do with price. Price is money. Cost is what you're giving up. The benefit is what will satisfy your want. So really, when you are making a choice, you're weighing costs and benefits, and that's what the students will be doing in this skill. The particular decision-making process we're going to use, your students would need to know what an alternative is and what the different criteria are. So an alternative are different choices to solve the problem, and the criteria are the standards used to judge the alternatives. So those are a few concepts that we're now going to practice. There is also an inquiry visual for economics, but it's titled Economic Choices, but it's still a very similar process as the other 3 disciplines. So going through this process, we are going to focus on kind of the 3rd step, and that's using a decision-making tool. We're going to use the PACE graphic organizer, and you should have a handout that shows a grid that we will be using. So PACE stands for the problem, then you identify alternatives, the criteria, then you're going to evaluate each alternative to make a decision. And that's the PACE decision-making tool. So the problem we're going to walk through today is how should we spend 30 minutes of choice time our class has earned. So we're going to walk through this grid for a group decision. And I'm going to kind of walk you through this using a piece of chart paper on my easel. So the PACE graphic organizer is a grid, and the first step is writing the problem at the top. So we know our problem is free time. The second step is the A. It's identifying our alternatives. And so if you asked a 4th grader, what might an alternative be if you had some free time? They may say, play board games. So you can list board games as one of your alternatives onto your grid. Another alternative, watch a movie. Some 4th graders may like music and art, so maybe they could spend their 30 minutes of free time doing some artwork, listening to music. And the final alternative for our problem today is to go on the playground. So we've identified 4 alternatives to solve our problem. But to reason through making a decision, you have to have criteria. You need to decide what is important to you. What do you value? And everyone has different values. So this is a really great activity to talk through with kids. So the first criteria, if you were to ask 4th graders, it's very valuable to play with friends. So I would probably think they would bring up that one. Another important criteria is exercise. I think kids like to be active. The 3rd criteria for our problem is fun. It has to be something fun. And finally, this criteria is a standard that there is no choice. They earned 30 minutes. So 30 minutes is a criteria of time, and that one doesn't have any wiggle room. All right? So we've just done the PAC, and now we're moving on to the E. We are now going to evaluate. We're going to evaluate each of our alternatives against the criteria to come up with the decision. You can use a ranking system of numbers to do this, but I'm just going to use simple pluses or minuses. Okay? So you just take your first alternative is playing board games. If we play board games, do we get to play with friends? Yes, we do. So that would be a plus. If we play board games, do we get exercise? No, so you put a minus sign there. That doesn't match up very well. Are board games fun? Absolutely, they are. And finally, could you play a board game in 30 minutes? You could. And so that meets 3 of the 4 criteria. So you would walk your students through each of these different alternatives by judging it against your criteria. You're weighing that, and you would come up with a completed PACE graphic organizer. And as you can see, the one alternative that meets all 4 criteria is the final one. And that is playground. And so the playground is the best option to solve this problem of using 30 minutes of choice time. We use this for a group choice, but you can also use it for individual choices. One concept that's very important to review when making choices is the second place choice. When you are looking at making decisions, what you gave up second is your biggest cost. And it actually has a very specialized economic name, and this is in the grade 2 benchmarks. It's called opportunity cost. So in our situation that we just went through, the second place choice, was actually playing board games. That would have been our opportunity cost. So when we chose to play on the playground, we gave up playing board games. So I'd like you to take a minute, now that we just went through a reasoned decision-making process, and think about 2 choices that you could have your students use a PACE graphic organizer for. And this decision-making process is also in a 5th grade benchmark in a historical context. So please take a minute and chat 2 choices for the PACE graphic organizer. All right, a couple of the choices that were entered in the chat box.
Doing homework or watching a favorite program, where we should be going on a field trip, what should the after school snack be, silent reading or running a mile. I like that one. Some other great options.
Great, thanks Heidi. All right, the big takeaway is to use a reasoned decision making like a PACE grid. You can also use a decision tree to walk the kids through that weighing of different alternatives. All right, here we go. We're moving on to geography, and geospatial thinking is a very, very important skill. It's practiced at all grades, K through 6. The question is, how do I know where things are? And that is so important. We're going to go down to grades 1 and 2 and actually focus on creating sketch maps. Sketch maps are explicitly in the 1-2 benchmarks, but this is a skill that should be practiced by kids at K-12, really every single grade. There are multiple uses for a sketch map. And so even though the creation of sketch maps is not explicitly geographic inquiry, it's a building block to that inquiry process because it fosters spatial thinking. So the big concept behind this skill is the concept of space. And a lot of times when you think about space, you think of outer space, but really space is a huge concept in geography. This position of objects and their relationship to one another is space. It then relates to location, and then it gets down into directions and describing things using north, south, east, and west. And really all of this is called spatial thinking, and it is vital to give students practice with spatial thinking in school. So how do we get students to practice this vital concept? We use sketch maps. And again, it's not explicitly on this visual, but it's really important. So I'm going to walk you through a sketch map, and then you're going to create one on your own. So grab your piece of paper and a pen or pencil, and I need all of you to do this with me. And it's a sketch map. So what you're doing is you're going to take your mental image of this place, and you're going to put it down on paper. Okay? The place that we are going to do a sketch map for together is our state of Minnesota. So real quickly, just draw Minnesota. Again, this is sketch map, so really do it quickly. All right? So what I'd like to do is ask you to put 3 things onto our map of Minnesota. And it's okay to guess in a sketch map. You might have some students who have had experience traveling around our state and others who maybe just are new to Minnesota, moving here recently. But it's okay for everyone to do sketch maps because it's just a guess. We're just taking a picture of what's in your brain. So the first thing I'd like you to do is make a symbol. Put a star with a circle somewhere where you think our capital city is. Each of the 50 states has a capital, and our state has one as well. So put a star with a circle where you think the capital is. Okay, the next thing I'd like you to do is to use abbreviations and label the bordering areas. What is to the east, south, west, and north of our state? We're not an island, so just use some abbreviations and let us know what surrounds Minnesota. And the last step is to take your pen or pencil and draw a line in to represent the Mississippi River. The Mississippi River is a very important part of our state and of our country. How does it flow in Minnesota? Okay, take a guess. You've just created a sketch map. There are unlimited possibilities with how to use this. I could collect them from you as your teacher now, and I would know what you know about our state. A lot of times I have students just immediately correct their own. So go ahead and check your Minnesota. So our capital city, St. Paul, is about here. To the east of Minnesota is Wisconsin. To the south is Iowa. To the west is South Dakota and North Dakota. And to the north is Canada, or Manitoba and Ontario. And of course, we have Lake Superior in this area. Okay. And finally, that Mississippi River. It starts in north central Minnesota and Lake Itasca. It actually flows north before flowing south and makes a hook. It flows right through our capital city, and then it makes the border with Wisconsin in the southeastern part before flowing to the Gulf of Mexico. So that is what the Mississippi River looks like. So again, sketch maps have so many possibilities, and you were just all thinking spatially when you created that sketch map. What you're going to do now is take the back side of that piece of paper and just quickly think of what the playground looks like at your school. Take 1 minute, and only 1 minute, to do a quick sketch map to capture your snapshot of your playground on paper. So 1 minute, go. Okay, just a few seconds. These are very engaging. These are a great activity. You can also use them for settings and stories, for literature. Again, so many possibilities. This might be what your sketch map may look like. This might be what a student's sketch map of a playground looks like. Again, students tend to see things from the side view. That bird's eye view develops quite a bit later in older students, and that's okay. But it's fun to capture views of sketch maps. In first grade, they do familiar settings, and in second grade, students create sketch maps from stories. So this might be from a piece of literature that you've just read your students. They could make a sketch map of the setting. Continue to do these in grades 3 through 6 as well. So to review, a sketch map is a picture of a mental map that you carry in your head. You take a pencil or a pen and a blank piece of paper. You can also do it like with a drawing tool on an iPad or a computer. And you need to do these with your students to foster spatial thinking and give them a sense of their place in the world. And they're also just very fun and engaging. Describe 2 sketch maps you could have your students create. So if you enter those in the chat box, and then we're going to be moving on to our civics skill. Just take about 30 seconds to enter in some locations you could have your students map. The takeaway from this activity of doing sketch maps is don't just have your students color and label maps, have them do sketch maps. So our final skill is civic inquiry. And again, this is one that is practiced every year from grades K through 6. How do I act as a member of a community is so important. So grade 5 teachers, this is a specific benchmark for you. It has 3 verbs and specific skills within this one benchmark, identifying a public problem in the school or community, analyzing it from multiple perspectives, and creating an action plan to address it. What are some of the concepts that you will be reinforcing when you have kids create action plans? The biggest one is a public problem. A public problem is something that it impacts a group of people. Students tend to have a lot of private problems, but this is an opportunity to really get them to think collectively and see the community as a whole. There's a visual to support this process, and since this is a 5th grade benchmark, the whole visual actually takes you through the process to create an action plan, and that's what our skill is. You have a handout that you could use as the template to create an action plan. There's also one right on that CSSE website. This is a blank template, so the students could have the one I just showed you before, this one, and next to it they could have this one, and they could just write down their process specific to the problem at their school. So we're just going to briefly walk through an example of a public problem and how you could have your students create a civic action plan. So the public problem that we are going to walk through is lonely kids on the playground. You need to look at this from multiple perspectives. So when you think of a public problem, you definitely want to get some input from students on this. Who is involved with this problem? Why is it a problem? You also want to get some input from parents. And finally, part of the school community would be the teachers and the administrators. So we have all of these people and we need to hear from them. This particular problem actually came from 2nd grader Christian Bucks, who lived in York, Pennsylvania. And what his solution was to create a buddy bench or a friendship bench. And so when you use this civic inquiry process, the biggest part is that last step, is to create the action plan. And so the students would need to put together maybe a poster or really outline their plan in some way and take action. It might involve going to meet with the principal and even attending a parent meeting. If you really wanted to follow through with this particular one and truly take action, it may even involve going to a school board meeting to get the permission necessary to build a buddy bench on your playground. So solving civic problems or public problems is a very important skill and process for students to do. So to review this particular skill, again, you identify, you analyze, and then you create an action plan. But ideally, the students are going to do something. So it goes beyond the classroom, and that's really the important part of civic education. What are 2 public problems you could have your students address in your context? So please take a minute and just think about what's something that you could do a civic action plan for in your building. What are some of the public problems entered into the chat box?
Long lines in the cafeteria, messes in the cafeteria. Mary Lee mentioned just doing one about bullying, and they shared a video they made a video to share with other students, disability accesses and walking to the buses and sidewalks and treating substitutes with respect. Being a former substitute, I love that idea.
Great, well, thank you so much for sharing those. And it's just really important to let the students also be involved in identifying the problem. Again, those verbs in the benchmarks, we want students to do all of those verbs. And so this was a 5th grade benchmark of actually creating the action plan, but really all of those steps are practiced in grades K through 4 to build up to this civic action plan. And students will continue to create civic action plans into middle school and high school. So again, really try to get your students to pick something real that's really an issue in your context and work together. That's the other thing with the civic action plan, is you can maybe do some individual thinking and some of the other skills we talked about today, like individual choices or individual sketch maps, but really this one is truly a class effort, and really working together is a huge part of the civic inquiry process. So take action and get involved is really what we want our students to do as elementary students, and you know they're very capable of doing that. So what are the 4 social studies skills that we covered in today's webinar? We just did civic inquiry. We did a PASTE graphic organizer. We did geospatial thinking using a sketch map. And we did primary source analysis as part of historical inquiry. So even though we really focused on a specific grade level benchmark, all of these are skills that we want kids practicing at all grade levels in elementary school. What questions do you have about the 4 social studies skills that we covered today? Please chat a question that's on your mind now into the chat box, and we'll take a few minutes to address your questions. All right, as you're doing that thinking, one more thing to think about is how can you work these 4 social studies skills into your weekly curriculum? So please also enter that into the chat box. So not only specific questions about the skills, but ways that you can integrate them into your weekly curriculum. Okay, we're going to take a couple of minutes now and address some of the questions entered into the chat box.
What are some ways to incorporate civic inquiry for middle school when we have 260 students? Each teacher has about 140 to 160.
Right, and again, getting those kids really to take ownership and be part of the problem that you analyze and getting them working in small groups. The templates on the CSSE site are really designed to be used by students so that they have a process to work through. And so you're right, it is a challenge, whether you'd all want to try to address one to start, and then maybe depending on how that goes, then small groups could take up their own, but maybe just starting together and addressing a really big issue at your school. Also, don't limit it to your school. There are some schools in the metro area and in Minnesota that look at water shortages and take action and build, raise money and build pumps and wells in Africa. So really open it up and think of global examples also.
Another question, how can I help to implement these skills across my district?
Great, and right, that also is very important to really give it a district-wide view. I know one way to maybe communicate with others is through using Google and Docs and applications and just really putting some things in some common sites. Again, a lot of the things that we went through today are directly on the CSSE site, and there are more tools being developed every day to support inquiry at the elementary level. In addition to the visuals that were on the drop down on that CSSE site, there is a list of other websites that you can go to and have groups of teachers read them. They're just a couple like 2-page articles or websites that really support what inquiry looks like in social studies. So maybe just coming together around a couple of common documents or projects would be a place to start.
Some of the implementation of these skills into weekly curriculum are with language arts and doing sketch maps of both fiction and historical fiction, and talking about Native American reservations and territories, and economics, the classroom store.
Those are all excellent applications of things that you can do. And that kind of leads us into wrapping up our webinar and just revisiting why we want to take time to do these. Again, just they're so engaging and really preparing students for being members of not only their classroom communities and school community, but at all the different levels and layers of the world. And so what we really want to think about is having students embed and integrate some of this social studies into exactly what you're saying, into English language arts, and have them writing about it in math. But as you can see today, you really do need some standalone time for students to practice these rich discipline-specific skills in the classroom. So just finding those few minutes here and there. Again, the sketch map especially just takes a couple of minutes. And some of those primary source document analysis, you can put those in front of kids, just get them really hands-on and do those in a quicker time. And yes, some of them, especially like a civic action plan, is going to be a bigger project, but just think of all the math and ELA and science benchmarks and skills you can integrate right into a civic action plan. So Kate and I just really want to thank you today for taking time to come together and learn about some civic and social studies skills. And we really want to thank you for all you do to prepare Minnesota students for citizenship, college, and careers. Here's our contact information. Please follow up with us if you didn't have your question answered today.